All right, so it's the What Happened to Music podcast guest edition. So we brought Jeff Ralston. Now, I probably should explain Jeff Ralston. We met him in college, and
did.
Jeff's a professional working musician. And Jeff, I believe you once said, and this was a few years ago, you were very proud of the day where you had more money on your taxes claimed from actually playing gigs and being a musician than doing other side
So he's
jobs.
the most legit of the legit people.
Yeah, he's much more legit. So we're going to be talking about, because you do a lot of cover band, wedding band gigs.
Yes.
And I think you would agree that probably wedding bands are one of the few, or one of the last places for people to have consistent work as a live musician and still make a living. Yes, no, no. Yes?
Yeah, no, there's definitely, I mean, weddings cost a lot of money. And people are willing to pay money for weddings because it's their only day. So
we're going to be talking about but backing tracks. So I know cover bands that use them, wedding bands that use them. So the pros, the cons, the
sure. Well,
the gray areas.
When you talked about having me on, the first thing I talked about was the first thing I thought about was we should talk about tracks. Because, excuse my voice, by the way, I'm fighting a cold. So it sounded like Batman this morning, but I think I'm all right.
I'm Batman.
I am. Anyway, I said we should talk about tracks. I play in some bands that use tracks. I play in some bands that don't use tracks. And I'm surprised at how prevalent I see tracks are these days. Mm-hmm. When I first got the gig with the band that uses a lot of tracks, when I first tried it, it was like, whoa, okay, this is different. And I didn't even know what to expect. And a lot of people actually, apparently the gig that I got, a couple people quit because they didn't want to play with tracks. I'm like, okay, interesting.
So when you say playing with tracks, just for anybody who isn't aware, can you just give a definition?
Yes, well, there's lots of different types of tracks. I guess we should talk about it. Playing with the track could be as simple as playing with the click track. That's actually something I used to do in my old church band. We had a drummer that controlled a metronome, and we, as a unit, I won't call anybody out, had some timing issues. So we decided to put a click track on, and it was actually fantastic. And we used in-ear monitors, so it was fantastic. We could hear the click track in our ears. Everyone was on beat. We didn't rush. We picked the tempo, set it, forget it, good to go. That's a very basic form of a track. I mean, is it the tracks that we're probably going to spend most of the time talking about? No, but it's worth mentioning.
And even that in the jazz world is like a big no-no.
Well, yes, but you know how many people do it?
but no, I know that's a big controversy sometimes where we'll have somewhere it's like, oh, this was, recorded to a metronome when, the time should be perfect just from your drummer. But it is funny how even something as theoretically benign as that in some circles is frowned upon.
Sure, and there's certainly pros and cons even playing with metronome. What if you want to speed up? You can't anymore if you have a click track on, or else someone's got to mute that. So, and there's definitely some jazz musicians that I know offhand that have played the tracks. Yeah. I didn't know it's quite so controversial, to be honest with you.
Well, I feel as a public service announcement, if you have a band and you're recording a good album or demo and you're like a rock band, you should have
a click.
Yeah, you should have a click track and, and a scratch track and all that other stuff because it's your time is not as good as you think it is. Anyway,
please
continue.
play to a click. I would strongly recommend that through the production process, even from an editing standpoint. It helps.
and even from that, I mean, you can make it speed up and be like, this is the exact tempo. And so, I mean, the songs are set. It's not like there's big improvising sections of it. It's just, so yeah, but do that because...
Now, another kind of track is what I like to call supplemental tracks. And supplemental tracks are tracks that we'll use to play along to that have instruments that maybe you don't have. But they don't have everything. So you might play in a band, for example, the band that uses primarily a lot of tracks, the band that I play with, that one does not have any horn sections. So whenever we want to do a song that has horns, and we often play weddings, in which case people want to hear the horns, you can get a backing track that maybe has, I don't know, a hi-hat or something to keep the time a little bit, so the drummer has a lot of freedom, and then the horn tracks, essentially. And that's actually pretty effective. And then there's another, I've also played along the tracks that are literally karaoke versions. They have literally everything on them. And the first time I did that, I'm like, this is weird. Because I'm like, what am I here for in a way? But in the beginning, it was very weird, but also turned out to be something that could be embraced, I think. So I guess we could talk about the pros and cons of each one. Or
Well, what immediately jumps to mind when you're playing what you said is a karaoke track. What's the advantage of doing that? Like, why are you there then?
Okay. Well, the obvious pro of being able to be in good metronomic time is nice. You don't have to worry about clicking off the right tempo, because I'm sure we've all been in situations where we click the song off and that's a little bright, and it's caused some trouble. And do you slow down? Do you not? Not really. Sometimes the drummer is like, no, we're here. It's like, okay, well, whatever track you're playing to, there's where your time is. It's going to be the same every time, unless the DJ decides to mess with it. Well, that's a whole other thing. How do you trigger them? The band that I play with has lots of tracks as a DJ in the band that actually queues up those tracks for us, which is pretty sweet. We'll get to that. One thing it does, when you have like a karaoke track, or something that has most instrumentation on it, it certainly does ensure the quality. Oftentimes, some of the tracks that I play to are literally the artist-produced instrumental version of it. So,
just out of curiosity, where do you get these tracks? I mean, you buy
it's
them.
Actually not hard to find. If you look up like karaoke version of, sometimes the artist release. I think Taylor Swift has some of her tracks on iTunes, I think.
Just the back.
Yeah,
tracks.
you can just buy them. Like, you'd be surprised how easy it is to find.
It's another revenue stream.
Sure. And people do it. I mean, people buy them. So
is there also then a version of that where you could change what's actually playing? Like, I just want like a horn only.
Right. There's different websites that do them. I don't know the websites off the top of my head because I don't handle this.
We'll put them in the link if you remember them.
Sure. Yeah, if I find out, we'll link it up. But there are places where you can do, what's the name of it? Custom backing tracks, where you can actually literally choose which instruments to have in the background, which is kind of cool, and actually I think a really nice way to doing it. It helps to have something keep the beat, like a shaker or a drum or something, with the drummer can still play to. Because if, say, it gets real sparse and you only have horns, if you're not with it, the horns are going to come in the wrong spot.
Right.
So, but you can choose whether you want the background vocals. I've even played on some tracks that during the chorus will even have the lead vocal on it from the actual artist, which I thought was interesting. But it's there, it's light in the back, and it's okay. But you know what? Sometimes that can also save you depending upon different things. Anyway, so it keeps, in addition to ensuring the quality, in addition to keeping your time, it definitely gives you a real hard govern on your form. Because it's like, here's your form. It's not changing. And if you're ever not sure what's up, what's on the track, there's your answer.
It seems that also what would be beneficial is if you do have tracks, you can probably have people come in and out of the band a lot easier.
Yes.
Actually, thinking about it, I think George Vanderbilt, was saying, he had to learn X amount of songs for a gig, and I think some of them were in like medley form, where it's like, and he didn't end up rehearsing with the band. The band used a lot of backing tracks. And there's just times where he's going like, okay, I guess I can lay out.
Sure. Well, as a guitarist, it does give you a lot of freedom in some ways. The rhythm parts are often there. So if I want to start throwing in some leads, I don't have to worry about the rhythm lacking, because if it's there, it's like, okay, cool, and it provides like a different kind of artistry almost. At least that's how I've had to adapt to it.
Or else, you go crazy. I mean, it's easy to have the idea of, well, you're just a bunch of fakes doing it. Although those are usually the same people who just say like, cover bands don't can't write their own material, and but anyone could be in a cover band.
Well, I mean,
because that's another topic, cover band versus
cover
originals.
Band. They're two different animals.
But it's the same. It's the same exact mentality of anyone who didn't want the backing tracks. Now, I think that the band should be good enough to stand on its own merit.
Sure. Well, yes, of course.
But I think we'd agree you guys are competing with DJs, and you need as polished of a product as possible.
Oftentimes you are competing with DJs. One thing that I also think is definitely worth mentioning is it keeps the personnel of your band pretty small, which keeps your band affordable. So which is something to think about. I mean, I've played in bands with no tracks at all, and we have a 15-piece band. Full, 3-4 horns, 2 drummers, one of them playing auxiliary percussion, 5 front lead singers, bass player, guitar, 2 keyboards, and like, it's a production. And if you want to get that band in there, you think all these people are gonna come play for free? They're not. So it's like, okay, so you could have a 15-piece band and charge what, $20,000 maybe? Depending.
Yeah, and that's not an exaggeration.
Which is not unreasonable if you look up some events.
Yeah, no. Once I started looking up wedding bands, that's when I had a DJ at my wedding. I couldn't afford a a group that I thought would have been acceptable.
Right. Sure.
You know.
And if you can then bring in 6 people, 8 people, and essentially fill in all the stuff that you don't have, you get a pretty good product at what you want anyway at a price you can actually afford to actually book.
Yeah.
And you can actually get the personality of the band. And I mean, it's not like the singers aren't singing. They are. I mean,
Yeah.
the band's still
Yeah.
playing. And just for the record, even in the band that I use a lot of tracks in, we don't play everything to tracks. We do a lot of stuff without the tracks.
Yeah.
We can play without the tracks. Now, I do know some bands that don't have enough personnel to actually play stuff without tracks. That's a different. I think we can talk about that a little bit later. But that is a lot of the pros of working with these tracks. Plus, if you have a wedding, for example, and you only get one first dance,
Yeah.
it's a nice way to make sure it's not gonna suck, you know.
Yeah.
So
you're saying that you don't want people going bridezilla on you.
well, that's happened before. That should be a whole separate pod. That's what we should do. Horror stories on the gig.
Oh, jeez.
That could probably
We could probably do this.
we could probably do something like that.
Actually, fun fact: Jeff played the processional music for my wedding.
I did.
And when I was walking in, I looked at him and asked him to turn down the treble.
Didn't I? I did though, didn't I?
I don't know if you did,
I don't remember.
but to be all bridezilla on you, I'm like, trebly.
Hey, but you know what? I trust your ears, so if that's what happened, is what happened.
Am I allowed to say that's when you turn to me and you're like, Joe, you need to stop the wedding. You can't do this now.
Get him out.